feminists in the West think that feminism is for the West. They think that feminism is a Western value. They don't understand, like, no, it's not. It's a human value. This is something that we all strive for. It's true that in the West, you have codified it, you have made it a reality in the way that the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world hasn't. But that doesn't mean that we're not just as deserving. It just means that we haven't progressed yet to have women and men equal in the way that your societies have. But it's like they have reached this point, and now they just want to shut the door behind them. Like, that's it. This is for us.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Lonely Podcast. On this episode, I'm speaking with Yasmine Mohammed. Yasmine is a public speaker, a human rights activist, and the author of the book Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Her book details the terrifying yet inspirational story of growing up in a fundamentalist Muslim family in Canada, forcefully marrying a member of Qaida, and how she eventually broke free. Yasmine is also the founder and president of Free Hearts, Free Minds, a non-profit that connects women from all over the world who suffer under the boot of radical Islam. She is also a founding member of the Clarity Coalition, which is composed of Muslims, ex-Muslims, academics, and scholars who advocate for peace, liberty, and secular governance. On her podcast, The Forgotten Feminist, Yasmine brings forth the inspirational stories of women who grew up in fundamentalist religious families and how they overcame. Lastly, I would say that Yasmine explains so coherently and clearly how, in the name of tolerance and diversity, the West caves into the hands of radical religious extremists. So, please welcome Yasmine Mohammed. Your book is fantastic. It's brilliantly written, but it's very hard to read just because the stories are terrifying. I can't imagine going through something like that as a child. And it's just terrifying to think of, a child in your position had to live through this. And the thing that made me feel, oh my God, this woman is incredible, is the fact that it seems like it's innate in you that you just ask questions. You are curious by nature and you want to figure out, why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? I gotta tell you, I don't think that, for example, for me, it wasn't exactly like that growing up. You talk about the principle of being a shepherd in Islam. So you quote in your book, I'll read it. You say, it's the parents' responsibility to ensure their children memorize the Quran, do not miss daily prayer, and follow the narrow path set out for them. And now I think it's a quote from the Quran. Each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for his flock. The ruler is a shepherd and is responsible for his flock. A man is a shepherd of his family and is responsible for his flock. A woman is a shepherd of her husband's household and is responsible for her flock. So do you mind talking about your upbringing and that principle of shepherd, in like how it intertwines with that?
Yeah, so obviously when you have a shepherd, you also have sheep. And you'll notice in that, hierarchy, I was the sheep. I was at the end of this hierarchy as the child. So my job was just to follow and listen and obey and don't question. And as you mentioned, that was something that was difficult for me because I always was very curious. And that is the worst possible thing a Muslim person could be, especially a Muslim girl. So I was told that was the devil in me. The devil in me was making me question. The devil was whispering in my ear these questions. And so when I ask them, I'm doing the devil's work. So yeah, as the sheep, I'm supposed to just shut my mouth, follow the herd, and do as I'm told, without ever questioning or thinking even. So yeah, that was my job, and I was not very good at it.
Yeah, it appears that way. So can you walk through how did you grow up, your household, family, parents?
Sure. So my father is originally from Gaza, so his family is Palestinian, and my mother is from Egypt. And at the time when my mother and father met at university in Egypt, Egypt was giving all the rights of citizenship to Palestinian people except for the right to citizenship. They couldn't be citizens, but they could get all of the rights of citizenship. So one of the things that he could avail of was a free education in Egypt. So he went to Egypt to get a free university education, and that's where he met my mom. They were in university together. I don't know if you're familiar, but you might be, that the Palestinian people have a really sort of negative reputation in the Arab world. There's a lot of bigotry towards them. There's a lot of really, I can't call it racism, but I guess bigotry, yeah. And so my mother's family, when they found out that my father was from a Palestinian family, they told my mom, we would prefer if you married a garbage man, an Egyptian garbage man, rather than marry a Palestinian. So they were not very happy. But my mom, turns out, was, maybe I got this streak from her, because she didn't listen. And she said, no, I'm going to marry him. And, I love him, and we're going to move to America together, and everything's going to be great. So they did get married, and they did move to America together, but everything was not great. Everything was terrible. It was during the 60s, the peace, love, and hippie era, and they moved to San Francisco. So it was just too big of a jump, I think, for my mom. Even though she was secular, she never wore hijab, she never prayed, she never went to Islamic schools. Nobody in her family was religious. Religion was like a cultural thing. Egypt was very secular in those days. For the educated people or the high class people, the only ones who were reading Quran or wearing hijab were the people in the villages. It was like looked down upon to be religious. And but still, it's still a conservative society, and compared to San Francisco in the 60s, I think pretty much any society in the world would have been considered conservative compared to San Francisco in the 60s. So my father loved it. He loved everything about it. He loved smoking pot. He loved the free love. He loved everything. But my mom didn't. And at that point, they'd had my sister, and she said, I need to go somewhere where there's more of a family atmosphere, where it's quieter. And so they moved to Canada. They moved to Vancouver, Canada. And that's where my brother and I were born. But the marriage still fell apart because they were not a good match. And I was about 2 years old when my parents were divorced, so I don't really remember having my dad in the family very much at that young age, but I do remember him visiting periodically when I was a kid. So eventually my mom just found herself really, I guess, depressed, alone with 3 children in a new country, by herself. And she went to the mosque, not as a religious place to go, but just like somewhere to looking for community, looking for maybe other Arabic speaking people, maybe other Egyptian women that she can be friends with. But of course, in the mosque was living this Egyptian man, and he took her on as his second wife. So in Islam, a man can have up to 4 wives. So my mom was his wife number 2. And there's definitely a hierarchy with the wives. So the first wife is like the leader, and then the subsequent wives are, the more subordinate. And so my mom was the subordinate wife. So the first wife and children lived upstairs, and my mom and us, we lived downstairs in his basement. And my life just changed very, very quickly. I went from being somebody who would ride my bike and go swimming and play with the neighbors' kids, and everything was just normal about my childhood, just pretty much average Canadian kid. And then once he entered our lives, it was like suddenly my mom had to start wearing hijab. He was breaking our records because he said music is haram. I wasn't allowed to play with my friends anymore because he said you can't play with non-Muslims. Wasn't allowed to celebrate birthdays anymore because birthdays are haram. Haram means forbidden. Everything was haram. Swimming is haram. Riding a bike is haram. Like, pretty much breathing is haram. Or anything but breathing is haram. The only thing that you were supposed to do was pray and memorize Quran. That's it. Anything else other than that, he would whip us. So I hated him, and I was angry at my mom for marrying him and for changing our lives like that. But that was my life. Took us out of regular schools, put us in Islamic schools. So I did not get a decent education in those years at all. In fact, there was one year where I was taken out of school entirely. Didn't even make a difference because I wasn't learning anything at the Islamic school anyway, except to hate Jews and gay people and to kill infidels and, just violent, horrible things like that. But we're not learning, reading and writing and math and, nothing academic. And so that was my life until I graduated from high school. I finished high school, and my mom wanted to marry me off, but of course we're in Canada, and I was not a conforming, subservient girl. I was always pushing. And so what she decided to do was to just leave me in Egypt with my family without informing me, without my consent. I woke up one morning, my family was all gone back to Canada, and I was left in Egypt by myself. And I was there for 2 years, and in that time, they tried to marry me off to my cousin unsuccessfully. And I eventually made my way back to Canada. And by this point, you can imagine, Evie, I was exhausted. And so through my mom's coercion, basically emotional blackmail, telling me that, if I wanted to be happy and if I wanted her to love me, then I would just marry this man that she chose for me. And the man that she chose was a terrorist. He was a member of Qaida. And
can I ask you something really?
Yeah,
sorry.
of course.
The interesting thing that about your mother leaving you in Egypt is that against all odds, you were able to actually reestablish your life, and you actually, you were able to, you went and got a job, again, against all odds, like in a completely foreign country. You said that the Arabic was not, it wasn't very easy at the time. And you mentioned in the book that because your mother suddenly figured out, oh, she's actually doing well, all of a sudden she's, oh no, that's not going to happen.
That's
so
true.
I just wanted to,
No, you're right. She didn't. I was doing well, and I refused to marry the man that they were trying to make me marry, and I had non-Muslim friends, so nothing was working. She took me out of Canada, left me in Egypt, hoping that, I would be more easier to control, but I still was. In fact, I had probably more freedom in Egypt than I did in Canada, because the aunt, not the first aunt, my first aunt that I stayed with was my mom's twin, and she's just as evil as my mom, if not worse. I don't know if it's possible to be worse, but the second aunt that I stayed with really because she wasn't my mother, she felt like there was only so much that she can say to me or tell me or control me. And so and because I was at that time 18, she felt like, that's what she wants to do. She's a big girl. She can make her own decisions, which was, not at all the way my life was in Canada. So.
Yeah. And how rare or the opposite of rare is your story
Well,
in
that's
the
the
Muslim
sad
world?
part.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is the really sad part is it is not at all rare. It is in fact so common that I have a podcast where I have so far interviewed about 25 women, and I'm booked all the way until 2024 with more women who are constantly telling very similar stories, much worse stories if they're from Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Pakistan. Do you know what I mean? Like, the fact that I was in Canada is really a saving grace. I'm so much more privileged than other Muslim girls and other Muslim women who are living in the Muslim majority world, where they don't only have to overcome the control of their families, but it's like government, law enforcement, greater society. So it's so much harder to be an individual. I mean, you see what's happening in Iran and how difficult it is for the women to just decide what to put on their head. You can't make any decisions for yourself. So, and the fact that she dropped me off in Egypt, you would not believe how common that is. I've heard stories from people saying, yep, my family dropped me off in Jordan. My family dropped me off in Pakistan. My family dropped me off in Iraq. My family dropped me off in Somalia. There's so many similar stories where families do the same thing, where they just drop off their daughter without her consent, without her knowledge, and just leave them there in the hopes that if they get them out of the Western environment, away from liberal values and freedom and feminism, then it will be harder for that girl to continue to flourish.
And just at that time, you described this the moment in the book when you realized that they just departed, they left you, didn't even say a word. Did someone took your passport away, or ensure that? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing your aunt.
I guess, I don't know who had it, but in order to go back to Canada again, I had to go to the Canadian Embassy in Cairo and resubmit to get my passport.
Wow. I want to ask you about the role of the hijab. Obviously, the cover of your book, and you talk a lot about it. You described the moment in the book that I'm not sure exactly how old were you, but you were forced to wear the hijab, and you, as expected, resisted. And you said, "Gone were all my clothes. Pants were no longer allowed. Now I was to cover every inch of my body but my face and hands. This was the moment that the final nail was hammered into the coffin of my childhood."
Yeah.
I found it very, very powerful, and if you can just talk about it and this how symbolic the hijab in the Muslim world and its impact on young girls.
Yeah, so I was 9 years old. 9 years old is the magic age when Muhammad, who was married to 6-year-old Aisha, 9 years old was when he consummated the marriage with her. So from that moment, 1,400 years ago till today, Muslims consider a girl of 9 years old to be a woman. She's a woman now. She's ready to be married. She's ready for her husband to have sex with her or to rape her. 10-year-old girls are having babies. They're probably, most of them aren't surviving, but they are getting pregnant. So that was the same age. I was 9 years old when they told me, that's it, you're a woman now. Your childhood is over. You're no longer, everything was like preparation for being a wife. Now you have to just know how to cook, know how to clean, know how to lower your voice, know how to lower your eyes, you know, just learn how to be an obedient wife so that you can make a good wife one day to some person that they choose. So yeah, you don't really realize, like, childhood is so short, you know, it's such a short amount of our life. Most of our life is spent being adults. And it's just so devious. It's just so vicious to take away a child's childhood before those few years that they would get. You cut them even shorter, you know? And at the time, because I was a kid and all I knew was childhood, I didn't realize how dark that moment was. Of course I was unhappy, and of course I didn't like it, but it truly wasn't until I watched my own daughter at 9 years old running off to school, walking to school with her friends. And, you know, at that time she was playing piano, she was playing soccer, she was swimming. And I remember looking at her and thinking, you know, that's how a 9-year-old's life should be. And that's when you start to realize what was stolen from you, you know? And like I said before, unfortunately, this is not just my story. This is so common. Girls have their childhood stolen from them because these men are pedophiles and they want to regard little girls as women. And because they're obsessed with virginity and they're obsessed with little girls, just like their prophet was. And so all of us are paying the price. Whether we're being married off at that young age or not, just putting the hijab on us is enough. It's like, that's the control, you know, that's the handcuffs that's put on us. They control your whole body now with this hijab, and your mind. They control you entirely from that moment. And the idea is that if you put it on a girl from a young age, then she gets used to it and she doesn't resist as much when she's older. So even the fact that it was put on me at 9 years old, which is the common age, some girls have it put on them from when they're still in diapers. You'll see little girls in hijab that are toddlers. From kindergarten in Islamic schools, girls have to wear hijab. So, you know, it's a very, very anti-woman, vicious thing that is done to girls. People think, oh, it's just a piece of cloth. You know, they don't understand all of the significance behind it. It's like looking at a slave and saying, oh, it's just handcuffs. That's what it's like when you say, oh, it's just a piece of cloth, you know? It's so much more than a piece of cloth. If it was just a piece of cloth, women wouldn't be imprisoned, killed, raped to death, beheaded, you know, suffering honor violence and honor killings all over the world because of hijab. And so I don't know how anybody can dare to call it just a piece of cloth.
Yeah, and the thing that I found also fascinating is the fact that you described when you went to Muslim school, you said all the girls hated this.
Yes.
However,
yes, of course.
However, it is, you know, unfortunately, I don't think there's a lot of stories like yours in terms of a person who was able to get out of that system that basically took out her hijab. And, you know, I've seen those videos of extremely courageous women all over the world taking off their hijab. It's like, if people don't understand like what you said in terms of literally being killed, we have proof of that. It happened in Iran recently. It happens all over the world. And but however, even in Canada, the thing that struck me as very surprising, and probably it's actually not that surprising just because I'm not super aware of that, I guess. I don't come from this world, is the fact that you said all the girls hated it. However, I'm guessing only very, very few of them actually take it off as older women, as like when they become adult.
Yeah, it's very, very scary, Evie. Very, very scary. They control you by fear. So, I mean, yes, it's true that girls suffer honor violence and honor killings. Even in Canada, there is a 16-year-old girl. Her name was Afsa Parvez. She was killed by her father and her brother because she refused to wear hijab. It is, and there are other cases of other girls in Canada as well, and of course, like you mentioned, all over the world. So yes, that violence is a fear. But before that, even, there's the fear of disappointing your parents, of being ashamed. They're, oh my God, honor, right? The honor of the family is the girl's responsibility. So if you take off your hijab, you've now brought shame to your whole family. Now everybody knows you're a whore, and that your father raised a whore, and that your mother raised a whore, and that your brother his sister is a whore. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have such, emotional blackmail that is all of these forces put upon you. And so you just feel like, is it even worth it? Is it even worth the fight? Your family could disown you because they are so disappointed in you. They're so disgusted. They're so angry. They're so horrified. The stories are endless with the women that tell me, what they go through when they take off their hijab. It is just like as if, maybe I can't even equate it to something in the Western world. Maybe it's if a daughter says, I want to be a stripper, the way the family would react. I don't know. I'm trying to find something that is like, the way they react is so over the top. It is so violent in most cases. In countries like Saudi Arabia, these girls, obviously hijab is not even an issue in Saudi Arabia, but in Saudi Arabia, if a girl what's the word I'm looking for, disobeys her father or her brother or her uncle or whoever her male guardian is, they'll just lock her in the house. They'll just lock her in the house. She can't leave. And if she complains, then they put her in these prisons that are made for girls who don't listen. So it's an impossible situation. You have so many forces against you. And this is why forced marriage happens so often too, is because of these same coercions that they've trained you to put them first, put the family's honor first, put your parents' wishes first before your own. And because you've been doing that your whole life, when it comes time to get you married, you just do what you're told. And then with your husband, you've been trained to always put the family's wishes first and the family's honors first. So that just gets translated into your husband now. His wishes come first, his demands come first, and you are there's never even a moment where you even think to consider yourself. I remember when I was in a podcast with Ayan Hirsi, and she asked me, because she was also forced into a marriage, and she asked me about being forced into it. She said, did you ever feel like angry about it or something? I can't remember how she asked it to me. And I said, I didn't even think I had the right to be angry. I'm just a thing. And I'm being told this is what you have to do. And so I have to do it. I don't have to like it, but I have to do it. And that's the way it is for us from beginning to end.
Yeah. It's just terrifying, honestly, to think of, and also that all of this is happening while you live in a Western country, surrounded by, people who never have to experience stuff like that. It's just right next to you. One of the moments in the book that personally to me were the most heartbreaking was on the chapter that you call Betrayal. Mm-hmm. That you discuss how for the first time you actually talk to someone outside of the circle and you expose the truth of what you're going through, your childhood, the abuse. And this man, your teacher, Fabro, I believe, Mr. Fabro, who wrote the foreword for your book, your drama teacher, and basically, can you explain what happened there?
So, my mom discovered that I had non-Muslim friends in school, and so she threatened that she was going to take me out of school. And so I was depressed. I was sad. And Mr. Fabro noticed. He paid attention. And he said, you know, you seem quiet, you seem different. Is everything okay? And I was it was like being in the desert and somebody's offering you a glass of water, you know? I just wanted to tell him everything. I didn't want to ever tell my friends anything because I was embarrassed. And also, what are my friends going to do other than pity me? And I didn't want anybody to feel pity for me. So I stayed quiet. I didn't tell any of my friends. But when he asked me, I felt like protected, you know, like maybe he can do something. Maybe he can actually help me. And so I told him everything, and I showed him the bruises on my body. And he immediately contacted the police, who contacted Child Protective Services. And then there was this huge investigation. They brought all of the kids, not only my siblings, but also his other kids that lived upstairs. And everybody was questioned. I have to tell you, though, that his daughter, the year before, had gone to school with finger marks on her face, bruised on her face. And one of the teachers called the police and alerted Child Protective Services. And she told them, no, it's nothing. It's nothing. Nothing. I don't know what happened. No, it's not fingers. I don't know what it is. So she didn't tell what happened, but there was still a record of that. So when I spoke up, it was the second time that they were hearing something going on in this house. Still, they interviewed all of the other kids, and they all lied. They all said, no, there's no problem. Nothing's going on. He doesn't hit us. There's no problems. And so the investigation continued, and it went to court. Because even if the children say no, there's suspicion. And so it still continued to go to court. And in court, the judge said, this is your culture, this is your ethnicity, this is your background, this is how your family chooses to raise you. And so, you know, maybe it's a little bit more drastic than your average Canadian family, the way they would discipline their children. But it's your cultural freedom. And so in that moment, what I heard from that judge was, you're not equal to the other Canadian children. You don't matter as much as them. If your family was from, you know, France or Germany or Denmark or something, then I would protect you. But your family's from Egypt, so you're fucked. Sorry. You know, there's no help. I can't help you.
So I want to ask, I guess, the betrayal is twofold. Basically, there's one betrayal from your perspective. You were betrayed by the Canadian government. But also from your family's perspective, you went to the Kofar.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes. Yeah.
How did that change the dynamic in your family?
I mean, I guess the best analogy I can give you is when you're part of the mafia. If you're a murderer or any kind of criminal, you're accepted, it's okay. But if you're a rat, you know, if you tell on the mafia, then you're the worst kind of human being. And that's how I was treated. That's how I was seen, you know, because it's very us and them. Muslims and non-Muslims, the good people and the bad people. And so for me to go to the non-Muslims for help against the Muslims was just absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I thought about the exact same thing. I thought it's literally like going outside of the mafia and coming
Yeah,
back, and the mafia, it's like they can't kill you now, but they just
mm,
know that
so
you,
much worse.
yeah, you rat
Yeah.
it out, and it's just that's basically what this judge was doing to you.
Yes. Yes. He sent me back to the lion's den, basically.
Yeah.
Worse than it was before, because now they had a really good reason to hate me.
Yeah. I want to switch to something similar, but like very, very much related, but and basically talk about the role of, the West, if I can, in this situation. So you just mentioned basically that the Canadian authorities, I would describe them as the West here, they completely failed you as a child. Literally gave your parents legitimacy to hit you, to abuse you, and to act in those ways that no one else would ever accept that. You mention in the book, you talk about the dichotomy of victimhood and superiority.
Mm.
I think it's very interesting. And
Hmm.
do you mind explaining what that means exactly and talk about it?
Yeah, there's a journalist, and I can't remember her name right now. I wish I could remember her name, but she came up with the term a cry bully.
Mm,
And when she was describing the cry bullies, of course, she was describing the same people that we're talking about. Um, it was, I felt like, oh, that's a beautiful description. That's exactly what it is. Instead of a crybaby, but they're bullies, but they're crying at the same time. So yes, it's exactly that weird space between constantly being a victim, constantly seeing yourself as the victim in every situation, always feeling victimized, always feeling persecuted, but at the same time demanding that you be treated with this privilege that nobody else gets to enjoy because you are superior than everybody else. So if you are treated like everybody else, that's considered, they consider that to be persecution. They have to be treated better than everybody else, superior to everybody else, in order for it to be fair in their eyes, because that's how they see it. They see themselves as, the best of humanity, the only good people, and nobody else matters. The non-Muslims are irrelevant. There's nothing but, not even hate, it's disdain. You have to care about somebody to hate them. It's just disdain. It's like cockroaches. You don't hate cockroaches, but you don't want them in your house either. They just have like this disgust of everyone who is not Muslim. And so to be treated the same in a democracy as the cockroaches, it's such an insult. So it was very, very frustrating to be raised in that environment. I never ever liked to see myself as a victim. In fact, I would often, when people would ask me, why are you wearing the hijab? I would say, because I want to, it's my choice. Because I don't want to be perceived as a victim. I don't want, I would be too humiliated. I would rather admit that I have chosen to wear this, or I would rather lie and say I have chosen to wear this, than admit that I am so disempowered that I can't even control what I put on my own body. So I had this real aversion to being a victim. I never liked it and I never wanted to play that role. But it's like that is the propaganda tool that is used in order to claim superiority. So you have to use that victimhood in order to claim superiority. And you see it all the time.
Can you give an example how it's being expressed?
So I'll give you an example because it was just a journalist in Montreal, Canada, just messaged me earlier today, and he sent me this article that in Quebec, one of our provinces in Canada, there is a Bill 21, which is essentially a decree that says that in a public secular school, and this will sound familiar to you because you lived in France, in a public secular school, there should be no physical representations of religion. They don't want to see hijab, they don't want to see turban, they don't want to see a cross, they don't want to see a kippah, they don't want to see anything. All children are here to learn in a secular, religion-free environment. When you walk into the classroom, you shouldn't be able to tell the what one child practices and what another child practices. So that's the way it is in France. In Quebec, they only have the rules for the teachers. Kids can do whatever they want, but the teachers can't have any religious symbols. And the argument for that is children will not feel safe if they see a religious symbol on one of their teachers. Maybe, say, for example, if a teacher is wearing hijab and they have a gay student in the class, that gay student knows that Islam calls for their death. 15 Muslim majority countries will execute people for being gay. So that child isn't going to feel safe in an environment where this person is wearing their religious symbol on their head. So the argument in Quebec is teachers, in order for the kids to feel safe, teachers can't wear any kind of religious symbols. Jewish people said, okay, no problem. Sikh people said, okay, no problem. Christian people said, okay, no problem. Muslim people, they have not stopped crying about it. Crying and wailing, oh, we're so persecuted, oh, we're so victimized, oh, we're so this, we're so that. It's the rule for everybody. It's the rule for all religions. Why do you think that you should get some kind of special treatment and that the rules will be different for you? So this is an example of them using victimization in order to demand privilege.
Yeah, this is a great actually segue to the next thing I wanted to ask you about. So a quick rundown in the history of the last 15-20 years, specifically in France. You just mentioned, so in 2010 France enacted la loi sur le voile intégral, the law against the burqa basically. And when addressing the French Senate, Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president at the time, said, "The problem with the burqa is not a religious problem. It's a problem of liberty, of women's dignity. I want to say solemnly, the burqa is not welcome on the territory of the French Republic." Since then, France has experienced probably the worst terror attacks in its history. Now, I lived in France when that happened. From Toulouse, you had the attack on the Otzar Torah, it's a Jewish school, where children were murdered, security guards were murdered. I believe one of them actually is Muslim, who was a soldier, a French soldier. You have the Charlie Hebdo, the Hyper Cacher, the Bataclan. All of these happen actually in a very close proximity to one another, and in a district actually where I lived in Paris. France lost close to 200 people, as victims of terror during the last 8 years, basically, since this law was enacted. There's another thing that I wanted to specifically mention here. In your acknowledgement, you acknowledged Professor Richard Dawkins, and you said that he's one of the bravest people that criticizes Islam but doesn't treat it any differently than any other religion. However, Professor Richard Dawkins was interviewed by Piers Morgan recently, a few months back. Piers Morgan asked him to opine on whether the wife of ISIS fighter should be allowed back into the UK, and whether he can comment on the Salman Rushdie assassination attempt, basically. It was clear to me, at least, just from his body language, that the man appeared terrified just by being put in that position of having to answer these questions. And he wanted nothing but to move on and ignore these questions. Now, I want to be fair here for Professor Richard Dawkins and say that I did saw that recently he posted a video talking about Islamophobia and his criticism of Islam. But looking back into the last 15 years, looking back at this and seeing what France initially wanted to do and what happened since, and people like, again, who were critics of Islam and what happened to them today, my question to you is, I don't want to frame it like this, but are we losing this? Is the West losing the fight for the democratic values?
As long as we continue to capitulate to bullies, we will continue to lose. As long as we continue to pander to terrorists, we will continue to lose. So one of the many tragedies that happened in France was Samuel Paty, who was a teacher, who was showing the Charlie Hebdo cartoons that you mentioned in his classroom because he was talking about free expression. He was talking about laïcité, which is one of the cornerstones of French society. And so he was talking to his students about free expression, and he showed that cartoon of Charlie Hebdo. And the students had such a strong reaction to this that they told their parents, and the parents told the imams in the mosque, and there was this huge sort of call for his death that ended up happening. And he was, in fact, beheaded on his way home, walking home to his wife and child. So when that happened, when all of these things that you mentioned happened, France and the rest of the world has a choice right now to say, will we continue to show this Charlie Hebdo cartoon? Will we continue to stick by our values of free expression? Or will we cower? Or will we pander? Or will we crumble in the face of these terrorists? France, time and time again, has continued to stand firm. After the Samuel Paty situation happened, they were using projectors to project the Charlie Hebdo cartoons up on buildings to make them as large and visible as possible. So that was their response. So it's an incredibly beautiful response to an incredibly vicious and vile act. And I think that's really important. But you'll also find that when the American media or the British media was, if they even bothered to report about Samuel Paty, they would never show the pictures of Charlie Hebdo. And even there's one interview where there was the woman that was being interviewed lifted up the picture when she was in a live broadcast, and they cut her out. Yeah. So that is that cowering that you see in the Anglophone world. That's what's going to get them killed. You know, that's what's going to get. In Denmark, they just released a law that says that you will get prison time if you burn a Quran, right? And now Sweden is looking to enact a similar law. That is how you cower to terrorists, to bullies, and that is how you continue to get bullied and continue to get terrorized. My mom had a statement which she didn't make up, but is something that she would say often. And she would laugh at Christians when they say, turn the other cheek, right? She'd say, yes, haha, turn the other cheek, because then it's easier to get your neck. That's how it is. When you are up against somebody or some force, many people, that hate your freedom, that hate your democracy, that hate your liberalism, you can't kowtow to that. You can't say, oh, okay, for the sake of diversity and multiculturalism, we will accept it. No, you have to firmly put your foot down. So even though France experienced so much terrorism, it was to try and control them, but they're not being controlled. Just recently, there was a law that was dropped in 2004 about the clothing in school, religious clothing in school, yeah. And the Muslims kept on defying the law and forcing their daughters to wear abayas and sending them to school in abayas. So what did they do recently? They said specifically a law against abayas in secular schools. So France are not backing down, as opposed to Canada, America, Sweden, Denmark, United Kingdom. I could go on and on. So I think sometimes, we have to recognize that this is a war. You may not know that you're in a war, but the other side is definitely aware of it. And their plan, which they have been very transparent about, is to spread the word of Allah across the whole planet, whether that be by the sword or whether through terrorism or whether that be through diplomatic methods. And so that's what the Islamists are trying to do. And so unless we're going to actually push back, then we're going to lose our values and lose our freedoms and lose ourselves.
And where is the confusion in the West? Because there is a lot of confusion here. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, I think the confusion is with this obsession with diversity and inclusion and multiculturalism. They do not understand the difference between valuing people of different races and different colors and different ethnicities and different cultures. They can't understand that is different from actually, celebrating people with repugnant beliefs. Do you know what I mean? Like, just because this person happens to come from a minority group, that's fine. You don't have, you can celebrate people who come from different minority groups, but if you are celebrating their ideology, which is anti-woman, anti-liberalism, anti-democracy, anti-freedom, that's the problem. Can you not celebrate people without celebrating their ideology? It's not that confusing, When they have campaigns where they bring a mix of different people from different countries, please do that. Bring people from Somalia, bring people from India, bring people from China, bring people from, South Africa, bring people from all over the world. But why do you have to start bringing in people with hijab? That's not a culture. That's not a people. That's not an ethnicity. That is a religion. That is a religious clothing. And they would never do that with any other religious clothing. Never. You see the burkini on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Do you think you're going to see Mormon underwear on the cover of Sports Illustrated? No, you're never going to see that. You're never going to see, Hasidic Jewish, the furry hats and things like that on a cover of a magazine. No, they don't celebrate other religions. And we have to say this, fundamentalist and extremist religions too, because a lot of Muslim women don't wear hijab. And those that don't wear it are ostracized in the Muslim communities and outside, because now they have taken the extremist interpretation of Islam and they act like this is what it looks like to be a Muslim. And so all of these American Muslim women who don't wear hijab are now being ostracized both in their community and outside of their community. They're not recognized as authentic Muslims because they're not covering their head in a scarf.
Yeah, you said that when modern feminists, they think that Muslim women are some sort of a different species, because they would never have tolerated the same type of, as you described, rape culture within the Western context. But they say, oh, if it happens to those women over there, then it's fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For themselves, they say, oh, free the nipple, right? What about people who are just saying free their hair, free their face? They're like, no, 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 that's their culture. They like it. They want it. Would you like it? Would you want it? Of course not. They don't want it for themselves. They don't want it for their sisters. They don't want it for their daughters. They don't want it for their mothers or their friends. But they don't care if it's happening to those women in Afghanistan or those women in Iran or those women in Saudi Arabia. Then it doesn't matter, right? They don't see us as women like they are women. The feminists in the West think that feminism is for the West. They think that feminism is a Western value. They don't understand, like, no, it's not. It's a human value. This is something that we all strive for. It's true that in the West, you have codified it, you have made it a reality in the way that the rest of the world, most of the rest of the world hasn't. But that doesn't mean that we're not just as deserving. It just means that we haven't progressed yet to have women and men equal in the way that your societies have. But it's like they have reached this point, and now they just want to shut the door behind them, like, that's it, this is for us.
Yeah, it's very frustrating to see from my perspective too. I remember so vividly being present in Paris during the attacks, and the day after, secular French people post on Facebook, they quote the Quran, saying that it's a religion of peace. The bodies are still warm, and you're already jumping to defend something here that I'm not sure exactly what you're trying to defend. Maybe give a moment for the victims and respect their families before we jump and try to avoid any potential bigotry. Anyway, it was very frustrating. Okay, I want to ask you about Israel and the Jews. We have a great chapter about the Jews in your book. So I guess you mentioned that your dad is from Gaza, and you said he wasn't religious, but he was really, really hated Israel. So
yeah, he really did.
Can you talk about whether your opinion on Israel has changed since your upbringing?
Significantly. Yeah. So I was born. My name originally was Philistine. That was the name on my passport, my birth certificate when I was born. My father named me Philistine, and it wasn't until my parents got divorced and my mom, that's when she changed it to Yasmine. And she actually chose a name that ended in "een" because I was 2 years old by then. So all my life I've been called Philistine, and so she had to think of a name that ends with the same kind of sound so that I wouldn't be confused. And the reason why my father called me Philistine was because of his deep passion for this, hate of Israel, and his insistence, his feeling of, which is a very common one, of Palestinians being, in an apartheid state, being persecuted. The Israelis are, just evil. They're just pure evil. And so I grew up, and let's be honest, it wasn't Israelis, it was Jewish people, because it's not just my father, it's the Quran. So it's coming from left and right, coming from my mother and my father, because my mother is the one that was teaching us religion. She was the one who's a student at Al-Azhar University doing her master's there. So the Quran and Ahadith are full of a lot of Jew hate, to the point that there's this one hadith that says that the world will not know peace, or we will not, strife will not end until all the Jews are killed. And the Muslims will be the ones to kill all the Jews. And even when the Jews try to hide behind the rocks and the trees, the rocks and the trees will call out, "Oh, Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me," because even the earth itself wants the Jews to be killed. So I grew up with this real I'd never met a Jewish person in my life. I probably did, but I didn't know it. But it was like this boogeyman, this monstrous, concept of the Jew that is out to cause evil in the world, and they must be annihilated. So it came, to be honest, more from the religious script than it did from my father. My dad was not a religious person. He was very nationalistic. He was sad about Palestine, was sad about Gaza, but he was just as angry at Hamas and Hezbollah and all of the useless Palestinian leaders, and how they would hoard the money and wouldn't even help the Palestinian people. Like, they're not building schools and hospitals, they're buying missiles from Iran, So he had just as much anger towards them as he did towards Israeli people. So I think for him it was different, as opposed to my mom, where it was a very religious thing, and then it was just all Jews. And in Egypt, which is where my mom is from, the anti-Semitism in Egypt is it's like breathing air, it's like drinking water. It's so common, normalized part of every day that you don't even recognize that it's bad. You just think it's normal.
Can you give an example on that? There's a great, you put a great story
from my
about,
book, yeah?
Yeah, with your aunt and the
aunt.
cucumbers. Brilliant.
Yes.
Loved it.
We were in the market, and she just kind of quietly says to herself, "Oh, the cucumbers are so small this year. The Jews are putting cancer in the vegetables, and they're making them to poison us, and they're making them small," or something. And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? Like, you can't put cancer in vegetables." Like, it's, and she's like, "Yeah, no, the Jews don't, the small ones are from the Jews. They put cancer in it so it doesn't grow, and because they're trying to kill us." It was like that. It was like this is why I say it was just a figment. It was like this concept of Jew, which was just beyond human powers, it's just evil, this big evil thing. Yeah, that's just the way it is in Egypt. The worst insults you can call somebody is Yehudi, is Jewish person. Like, that's like, the friendship is over. You can call his mother a whore. You can say whatever, but do not call somebody a Jew. Then that's it. That's the worst thing you can do.
And that's with a country that actually Israel has a peace treaty with.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but look what they did to Anwar Sadat, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That tells you.
Right.
That tells you everything you need to know. That's what they think of peace treaties. Yeah.
That's true. I don't know if you saw that, but during the World Cup in Qatar, Qatar granted entrance for Israelis, and just for that, and they were, put it mildly, were not treated well. And the thing that surprised me was that they were surprised that they were not treated well. There's an Israeli, sports reporter who was kind of, he put like this Twitter thread and was really surprised by, we are so hated in Qatar. And I think after he put that, he actually toned it down because it might have been offensive or something. I don't recall exactly, but I think it was something like that. And to me, I was like, what? Are you surprised? So another misconception that it took me a while to understand while living in France, that people believe that once people cross the Mediterranean,
yeah, magic.
Boom, magic. They just adopt all the, like you said, the laïcité principle, or all the stuff. It's not as simple. So
No.
I guess that's a part of the Western misunderstanding. Even in Israel, we don't understand that. I think that's my understanding. What should we understand then, when we approach this, when we look at this situation? What should Israelis understand that is going on in the? Because Israelis think, oh, we have a peace treaty with Jordan, we have a peace treaty with Egypt. That's cool. What is the reality?
Yeah. The reality is a lot of it is financial benefit, and it's about political powers playing chess. But that's not going to do anything to affect the mindsets of the people. It's not going to change the minds of the people that have been born and bred with normalized anti-Semitism all their lives. They're not going to just suddenly change. There's no magic there either, you know. You can see a lot of normalization with Israel happening in Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Bahrain, and it's good. It's nice to see the Abraham Accords. It's good to see. It's positive changes, but it's not going to be overnight, because again, these are just power plays that are happening at a political level, but at the societal level, people are reading their Qur'ans. People are continuing the same anti-Semitic tropes that they have been hearing from their parents and from their families and from the society at large. It will continue for a while. It's going to take a while for all that, if it ever does. It will take a while for it to seep through. But yeah, it's important to note that it's not genuine. It's for political or financial strategy.
Do you see this rapprochement between the Saudis and Israel, and also now the G20 announced this new road that they are going to build from all the way from India to Europe, and it's going to go through the Middle East and Israel? Do you see that as this is a positive advancement of the Muslim world? Is the Muslim world approaching more the West, or how do you view this? I can make an analogy between this and what happened with China. Mm-hmm. Right? So you said, so people in the West and America said, we're going to open up to China. China's going to open up. They're going to adopt our Western values, and it's all going to be great. Mm-hmm. What happened is that China did open up. The U.S. became pretty much dependent on China. However, American corporations are like bending the knees to China. You can criticize Hong Kong, you can criticize Taiwan. Mm-hmm. So, how do you see that? How do you see the Saudis gaining more influence in the world in that way? How do you see it as a net positive, or just I'm curious about your opinion there?
Yeah. So I think that MBS is, when we talk about Saudi Arabia, it's not equated to the Muslim world. Like, that's just Saudi Arabia. That's an absolute monarchy, and he makes decisions based on what's going to keep him in power. But what's happening in the Muslim world is like all sorts of different things, right? But as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, yes, MBS does want to be. He said that he wants Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, to be the new Europe.
Yes,
right. He really does see that this is the renaissance of the Arab world, that they will, overtake Europe for being the center of culture and everything else. So yeah, he really does see that. He really does want to achieve that. It is imperative that we never forget, though, that the reason, that country is where the house of Allah is. That's where Hajj happens every year. So if we think that you're going to somehow disentangle Islam from this Sharia-run country, I mean, it's an absolute Sharia, Islamic law governs the country. To try and think that it can somehow square that circle, you know what I mean? Try and be Sharia, but also the Europe of the new world. You know what I mean? Like this new land where people can just go and cultures can intermingle and everybody can be happy, but also Sharia, you know, like you can't have it both ways, you know, and he's constantly trying to play those games. So he says, for example, women are allowed to drive in Saudi Arabia now, right? Sure. However, because of the guardianship laws, the woman still needs to have her father's permission in order to get a driver's license, or her brother or her uncle or her husband. Some man has to approve for her to even go to driving school and to get a driver's license, for her to get a vehicle, and for her to leave the house. So he's playing this game of trying to keep everybody happy, to appease the conservatives in his country, who are basically his country. It's an Islamic law country, and also to appease the West and to try and make himself out to be this, you know, new Vegas of the Middle East. So it's impossible. His plan is impossible, and I don't see it happening. And unless there's actual real reform in that country, of course it's never going to progress. You cannot progress when your laws are based on a 1400-year-old book. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting dynamic here to see. He's definitely become more prominent, like a leader in the world.
Money. He has money.
Oh yeah, he has a lot of that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your story. And how did you get out? You mentioned,
Yeah.
and it's timely because we had 9/11 only 4 days ago, 3 days ago. So can you talk a bit about husband at the time and your marriage and how you got out of that?
The way I got out of the marriage really was my daughter. She's the one who was the catalyst for that. When she was born, he started talking about taking her to Egypt to have female genital mutilation performed on her, which is something that happens to close to 90% of the Egyptian girls. And I knew what it meant, but it was not, because it doesn't happen in my family. So I didn't expect that this was going to be something that I was going to have to deal with. And at that moment, I was, you know, of course, filled with so many different thoughts and feelings. Number one was the feeling that I needed to protect my daughter, and just fear that I wouldn't be able to do that. And then this sinking feeling that, oh my God, my daughter's life is going to be even worse than mine, you know, because all you want is for your kids to have a better life than you. And I thought maybe she'll have like the same horrible life as me, but now it's like, this is even worse. And so it was at that moment when I knew I had to get away from him. Of course, it's a long process, because not only, you know, I detail it in my book how difficult it was. And if it wasn't honestly just for the flap of a butterfly's wing, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. Like, a lot of it is just luck. But through a long series of complicated events, I was able to get out of his house into my mother's house. So, you know, out of the fire into the frying pan. It's a little bit less, you know, not as bad as being in his house, because I knew that I could, you know, my mother wasn't going to physically beat me up and break my bones the way he did. But, you know, obviously she was still going to be difficult to get away from. And then once I got away from him, it was get away from my mom. And that was difficult because no Muslim girl lives alone, you know, unless she's a whore. And this was a shame on the family. And at that time, she was the the head of the Islamic Studies department at the Islamic school. So her daughter living alone was just like too much. You know, she was horrified and couldn't believe that I would shame her like that. But I did. And I got my daughter in a daycare, and I started to go to university because, of course, that was something that was forbidden to me. I was never imagined I would see the inside walls of a university classroom. But this is what I wanted. It's what I'd always wanted. And started going to university. And when I was in university, there was one course that was called History of Religions, and it focused on the 3 monotheistic religions. And because I had my mother as my mother, I knew that, well, at least 1/3 of this content of this course, I know it. I'll be good. Like I know everything there is to know about Islam, or so I thought. So I'll ace that part of the course. And teaching the course was a Lebanese man who grew up Christian in Lebanon. So he understood my context. He understood where, what I was living in. So he would start to like pass me a hadith about like when the Prophet would say to drink camel urine to cure any ailments. He'd be like, did you see this hadith? Did you know this? And I'm like, what? I had no idea. I didn't know. And then he's like, did you see all of these verses talking about how the earth is flat? Isn't that strange? The creator of the universe doesn't know that he created it spherical. He thought he created it flat. How is this real? And so he kept on sort of pushing those moments for me that it was actually really intoxicating almost, because as I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, I was never allowed to question. I was never allowed to think. Critical thinking was forbidden. So suddenly in his classroom, I was allowed to ask questions. I was allowed to question. I was allowed to think. And so, of course, once you are allowed to start thinking, it's not that long before you start to realize, oh my God, this is just bullshit. A lot of it is not only stolen from Christianity and Judaism, but even from pagan, ancient Egyptian stories before that, and Greek mythology. And like, it was just all of the stuff that we thought was like divine scripture that Allah sent to this, angel to send to Muhammad in a cave, was just Muhammad plagiarizing stories that he'd heard in the marketplace from different merchants from all around the world. So it sort of starts to give you permission to be like, oh, so I don't have to accept that I'm less intelligent than a man. Oh, so I don't have to accept that my husband can beat me. So I don't have to accept that my husband can rape me. It just made you feel like it just like opened this window to you saying, if I'm not going to accept that the earth is flat, and I'm not going to accept that camel urine is what we should drink as medicine, and if I'm not going to accept that, semen comes from the backbone and all sorts of nonsense that's in this religion, well, I'm also not going to accept all of the misogyny too. So I was in that time of my life of like starting to unravel it, and then 9/11 happened. So essentially, I was truly bombarded both intellectually and emotionally at the same time. And there was no way that I was going to come out of that still a believing Muslim. I was already starting to be critical. And then I go home and my mom is celebrating. In the mosque, they're celebrating. I'm seeing, family members passing out candies and cakes. And, everybody is so pleased that 9/11 has happened. There's videos of it on the internet of people celebrating in the streets in the Arab world. And I'm like absolutely horrified, because this was next door. Canada and America, we're very, very close neighbors. And it felt like it almost like it happened in my country, you know. I'm glued to the TV like everybody else, watching the airplanes hitting these buildings, watching people jumping to their death, you know, and they're celebrating, they're happy, you know, they're like takbir, you know, it's just joyful. And I'm trying to comprehend this, you know, I'm trying to make sense of this. And I even said to my mom at one point, I was like, but there's even a daycare. There's a daycare at the bottom of you know, the World Trade Center, one of the buildings. Like, what about those babies? What if they didn't get out on time? And she's like, so what? They're just children. They're gonna die martyrs. They're fine. What about the families? What about the parents of these children? It doesn't matter. They're kuffar. Who cares? What about any Muslims that might have been working in the building at the time? It doesn't matter. They're going to be martyrs. Like, she just had no care at all about this thing that, if you remember, it shook the core of our entire world. And nobody cared. Like, from the Muslim community around me, there was nothing but joy. And that's when I realized I cannot be a part of this. I cannot be part of a people who feel joy at this kind of destruction. I can't be a part of it, because up until then it was theoretical. Of course I knew you're supposed to kill infidels. You know, the man they made me marry was a member of Qaida who was living in Afghanistan with bin Laden for a decade before he came to Canada. I knew all about terrorism. I knew all about the Mujahideen. I knew all about kill the Jews, you know, everything. I knew it, but it was talk, you know, it was theoretical. The stories of the battles that they tell you and all of the things that happened, it's history. It wasn't real, but 9/11 was real. And it was happening right now, right in front of me. And then you can't excuse it. You know what I mean? Like, you're forced to see it. You're forced to deal with it. And you're forced to ask yourself if you want to identify with the group that has caused this kind of destruction on the planet. Is that who you want to be? And the answer was no.
Yeah, I can imagine how hard it is also to do that. Are you in touch with any members of your family? Because in the book you said that you're not, but I just want...
My uncle. I have one uncle who speaks to me because he hates my mom.
The enemy of my enemy.
Yes. So he reached out to me, but nobody else in my family, no.
And
I have one cousin. Sorry, I have one cousin who married a Jewish man, and so she was disowned by the family. And I never even knew her because her father had died, and her father was my mom's brother. And and they were divorced anyway. So she was raised by her mom in New Jersey. So I didn't have any connection with her growing up. But I just heard through my uncle, he said something about her being married to a Jewish man. And I went, there's no way that they've accepted her. She must be like me. She must be like me, somebody who's disowned, right? And so I contacted her, and of course she was disowned. She's one of the people who I interviewed on my podcast, and she tells her whole story there. And so she is also somebody who I'm in touch with. Yeah.
And I have a hard question to ask you here, but I really highly recommend everyone to first read your book and also listen to your conversation with Sam Harris, because it's great. Well, Sam is, I love Sam. He's amazing, just amazing. Sure. And but it is, you go into more detail about your personal story there. Truly, you grew up with your mother. From the book, there are like so many just the level of cruelty is hard to imagine. You even mentioned a point when you were rushing to make dinner, and your mother came up to help you, and you asked her to do something, and you trusted her to do it, and she deliberately just put literally garbage in the pot. And for people who don't understand what it means not to have a meal ready to go the second your husband walks through the door, is it's a lot of trouble, put it mildly. And it's just such a cruel moment. But my question for you, because you do talk about gratitude and how you educate your daughter with that, and is there a place in you that are you able to forgive just for
Yeah,
your personal, for your sake, not for them, but for you?
I completely understand what you mean. And unfortunately, we don't have a word in English to describe this idea of forgiveness that just means that you're letting it go. It
Right.
doesn't
Sure.
mean I forgive you. It's okay what you did. I'm not
Right.
excusing it, but it's a concept more of like, I'm not going to continue to be poisoned by you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let it go. And that is something I had to do. Yes. I had to grieve my mother while she's still alive. I had to accept that this fantasy of a mother that I had in my head, of this relationship that I might have with her if I was good enough, if I listened enough, if I conformed enough, if I was subservient enough. I had to reach the point where to accept there's nothing more I can do. I married a terrorist for you. I wore niqab, covered myself head to toe in black for you. I allowed myself to be beaten and raped for you. I barely survived escaping that just to protect my daughter. And this is how you treat your daughter? Like I had to get to the point where it's like hard truths. I'm never going to have the relationship with her that I wanted. She's never going to be the person that I want to be as a mother or as a grandmother. And so I did have to just let her go and let all of this go. And the truth of the matter is, I can understand my mom because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this and talking about this and writing about this, of course, for the book. I do understand that from her perspective, because she would say these things to me, this is why I know this to be true. From the moment she married my father, when her family told her not to, she felt sort of defiant and proud of herself. But when the relationship fell apart and she was left with 3 children, she blamed herself and she thought, if I was a better person, if I was a better Muslim, if I listened to my family, then this wouldn't have happened to me, because I wouldn't have married this man, and then I wouldn't have been on the other side of the world away from my family with 3 kids alone. So she thought that the best thing that she could do was to be a good Muslim and to raise us to be good Muslims and to be the most conforming person possible, like to just listen, to be the sheep. She decided to be a sheep. And she really, really decided to be a sheep. Like she just started to be obsessed with Islamists like Hassan al-Banna and Yusuf Qaradawi and, just all of these vicious people from history. And I can't remember his name now, but there was one particular Egyptian guy, he's an Islamist, that talked about being in America and being disgusted by the whores around him and the disgustingness of the Western world and the debauchery of the freedom. And she really, really related to that because where was she living? In San Francisco in the 60s. So she was like, yeah, it's true. The West is like this horrible heathen place, And so she developed a real hate for the West, but she still lived there, because she's still getting all of the security and the freedom and the social support and the economic, stability that she's not going to have in Egypt, government stability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So much, of course, comparing Egypt to Canada, it's a better country to live in, but she still hated everything about the society, even though she was being an opportunist and taking everything that she could from the society simultaneously while hating it. But anyway, I can see how she really felt depressed by herself and went to the mosque and thought that Islam huwa al-hal, which is it's the Islamist slogan, which means Islam is the answer. She really thought it was the answer. She's a born-again Muslim. If you ever met a born-again Christian, they are so much more fundamentalist than those who were born into the religion. Because she never really practiced Islam before, she really felt like she was born again. And she took it to the extreme. Like I said, she was studying at Al-Azhar University, which is, one of the most prominent Islamic universities in the world. The university that refused to say that ISIS weren't Muslims. They have to tell the truth. Of course, the ISIS are following Islam. That's the truth. All of these years of them teaching their students this, suddenly they can't turn around and say has nothing to do with Islam. All of it is Islam. So that's how she fell into that world, and she became that person, and she lost whoever she might have been before that. I don't know, because that's the only woman I ever knew. Somebody who did not think outside of the blinders, the very strict parameters. So I knew when she threatened to kill me, it was like it made sense to me. I understood. When she said, I have to kill you before you leave Islam, because if you leave Islam, then I will be punished for eternity that I raised a non-Muslim daughter. So it was like a logical, there's no emotion. She's not my mother anymore. She's not a human being. She's just a sheep following the rules. And, it's a cult. And I feel sorry for her. And I know that she's brainwashed. And as much as I do not forgive the things that she did to me, I do understand it, and I'm not holding any resentment or anger towards her. Her life is punishment enough, she doesn't. There's nothing that could happen to her that is worse than the life that she's living now, So that's it.
Yeah. I want to ask you, and I know we're a little bit over time, if it's okay. In a perfect world, how is Islam being practiced? And do
Very little.
and do you have examples? Because there are examples of there are a lot of Muslim people who, for example, do not celebrate 9/11, who recognize the tragedy, who appreciate the liberty, etc. So I just want to.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So I am co-founder and co-director of a group called the Clarity Coalition. And that is created, the other co-director is a Muslim. His name is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. He's of Syrian descent. He was persecuted, his family, not him, he was born in America, but his family was persecuted in Syria because of their religious beliefs. They're Muslim, but they're like a minority sect of Muslims. And you know how it is with the Muslims, right? Unless you're Sunni, unless you're fundamentalist, you're going to suffer. And so his family came to America because of, the freedom that they could have here. And his father built one of the first mosques in Phoenix. So he is an example. He's actually one of the best examples. There are many others. Another one is Asra Nomani, who is a woman from India who I respect so much. She's another person who I interviewed on my podcast. There are a lot of Muslims out there who disagree with all of the aspects of Islam that do not match with the century that we are living in. If it does not fit with liberal values, it does not fit with freedom, democracy, feminism, equality, then it needs to be thrown in the garbage. And so they try to live as Muslims that are also free-thinking, open-minded people. So they have Islam as sort of a cultural element to their lives, more than a strict religious, literalist interpretation, following of the rules. And they are wonderful people. I would but to Muslims, they're considered non-Muslims. To Muslims, they're considered the bad apples. They suffer greatly because of their activism and because of their speaking out against extremists. You may have heard of Majid Nawaz. He's from the UK. He was beaten up in the streets when he was recognized. So this is what they are up against. They're up against the same enemies that want me dead and that want you dead. They want them dead as well. The same ones that are stabbing Salman Rushdie would be happy to stab Zuhdi Jasser if they could. So they are incredibly brave human beings. They're considered bad Muslims, but they are good people. And those are the people that I 100% hope that other Muslims will start to be inspired by. It's pretty difficult. It's pretty difficult to make excuses for your religion in this day and age. I just posted a video about an imam that was giving this sermon about in heaven, men will have women with breasts like pomegranates, and what kind of a God? He sounds like a pimp the way he's describing all of this tits and ass you're going to get in heaven. Nothing about that is spiritual. It's disgusting. It's filthy. It's abhorrent. And so it's really hard in 2023 to maintain your dignity and also try to defend those aspects of your religion. You have to make a decision. Do you want to be a good human being, or do you want to continue to say that it's okay that 6-year-olds and 9-year-olds get married because that's what your prophet did? You have to be able to use your brain and use your heart, and to say, okay, even if you still want to practice Islam, you still want to be a Muslim, that's fine. But you have to use your brain, and certain aspects of that religion need to be thrown out. You can't continue to defend it and still be a decent human being. It's impossible.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Lastly, I want to talk about hope and free hearts, free mind.
Oh,
if you
my
can
favorite
please.
Topic.
Sorry
That's
for
great.
leaving it to the.
No,
to
that's
the
good. I
end.
love it. Let's save the best for last.
Yeah.
So Free Hearts, Free Minds is my organization. It's a charity. It's a nonprofit organization. We're registered as a 501c3 in the state of California. And what we do is, when people renounce Islam and they get, quite often they are disowned by their families. They no longer relate to their friends or to their community, and everything they've ever known in their whole life before is just like shattered. And when you reach that point, it's a trauma. It's an actual trauma, and it's referred to as religious trauma. But religious trauma for people who are coming from Muslim communities and Muslim families is more extreme because you're also dealing with the violent aspects. Islam is the only religion that demands that if you renounce the religion that you be killed. It's the only religion that does that. And so it adds this extra element of fear, especially if you're living in a Muslim majority country where that is the law. You know, law enforcement are actually, you know, that's their job, is to take you and imprison you and have you executed. So what we do at Free Hearts, Free Minds is we offer a safe community to give back these people the community that they have lost. So, and we also provide group sessions to overcome the religious trauma, as well as individual sessions. So there's 8 different sessions in our program. Each one is 2.5 hours, where it all happens via Zoom, because we're dealing with people in America, France, Sweden, Pakistan, you know, everywhere in the world, every country you can imagine. We used to focus on people in the Muslim majority world only, but now that we have more funding, we were able to expand globally. So anybody from around the world. In fact, we've had quite a few people from Israel right now. One of our volunteers is an Israeli Arab woman who is living in Canada. And so people think, you know, oh, you're living in a free country, you're living in a democracy, oh, you're not going to have these problems. No, that's not true. Anybody who's read my book knows that's not true. So with Free Hearts, Free Minds, we're able to offer them, like I said, group support, individual support, and then community support as well, so that they never feel alone. Because you can feel incredibly alone. Some people can't even share with their spouse that they don't believe in the religion anymore, because their spouse will leave them. Because now the marriage is null and void. You can't be married to a non-Muslim. So it's incredibly rewarding work. I'm very, very grateful to be able to help the people who contact us. But I'm going to be honest, we can only help about 30% of the people who contact us, because we are limited by funding. We're always limited by funding. The onslaught, the tsunami of people that are contacting us, you can just imagine, you know, that's hope. That's hope. If you saw our waiting list, that would give you hope, because then you know the numbers of people. And what's important to remember is we don't even offer sessions in Arabic or any other language right now. We are only able to offer it in English. Our future plan is to offer in Arabic, but right now we're only able to offer in English. So we're talking about the small percentage of people out there in the world, in the Muslim majority world especially, who speak English, who have access to the internet and have the privacy to be able to have these sessions with us. We're only able to reach a small percentage of people. And still, even from that small percentage, we are bombarded with emails every day with people asking for our support. And like I said, we can only help about 30% of them. So as much as I am very, very proud of the work that we are doing, I really wish that we could help more people. And so that's my goal in the future, is to be able to offer sessions in Arabic, and if we're able to get more donations and more funding, then we can, you know, bump that number up from 30%, hopefully, to 100%.
Yeah, that's incredible that you're doing that, really. And definitely please donate. Okay, well, Yasmine, I couldn't thank you enough. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm super inspired by everything, you know, from your personal story to what you're doing today. Thank you for being such a coherent voice in this day and age when people are overly sensitive and always walking on eggshells. You're very clear and coherent, and you have such legitimacy and credit because of where you come from and your story. That is just almost, it's impossible to argue with. So thank you so much. And anything else you wanna say?
Oh no, I was just going to say, but they still do argue with me.
I'm sure they do.
They still say I'm a liar, I'm an Islamophobe,
Yeah.
But thank you, Abby. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was an absolute honor, and it was really cathartic and really lovely to have this couple of hours with you. It was really great. Good for my soul. Thank you.
Same here, same here. Okay. Until we see you next
Take
time.
care.
You too.